biggest piece of your carbon footprint are the 4 gas appliances in your home. Your water heater, your furnace, your dryer, and your stove.
You're listening to Climate Curious, a podcast for people who care about the world but find the current conversation about climate change confusing, boring, or scary.
I tell you, I'm pretty excited to have this conversation. So the stuff we're going to talk about today is probably the singular most shared piece of information I have learned in the last year, in that I've probably shared this and told people about this more than any other piece of information. And I've been potentially thinking about maybe buying a house, and I've been just like looking at a couple of places, and I've spent most of my time like boring / arguing with real estate agents about the gas in the building. So I'm pretty excited that we get to spend a whole episode talking about this.
Okay. Is it the most shared piece of information because it's the scariest piece of information, or is it just like your personal favorite thing?
No, you know what it is? It's neither. It's because it's the thing that I would have never thought about. I mean, I've properly felt, I properly felt like a moron. Not when I found this out, but not when I found this out. This piece of information I don't think anyone would know unless you're working in it. But There's like a precursor to this that I didn't realize, which is I had never thought of natural gas as a fossil fuel. Ever.
Is natural gas a fossil fuel? Yeah,
Apparently.
obviously. We all knew that. What? Please. Yeah, this is basic information, guys. Come on, please. And then it just snowballed. So for me, this is like one of those pieces of information that when you think about it, you're like, well, of course, but no one's talking about it. And so anyway, so I'm super excited that today we get to have Bruce Nilles with us, because he is a person I heard this from and have basically wanted any opportunity to get everyone in the world to listen to him. So this is my part of that. Let me tell you a bit about Bruce. So Bruce has spent the last 20 years working to end the use of fossil fuels, including leading a campaign in the US, which stopped nearly 90% of proposed new coal plants from being built and helped retire half of all existing coal plants. That's huge. That's a lot.
It's a lot. So he's a lawyer by training, and he's worked at some of the most important climate organizations in the US, including Earth Justice, Sierra Club, Rocky Mountain Institute, and now he's the executive director of Climate Imperative.
This guy gets about.
Yeah. I mean, then that's over a long period of time, but let's get going. Let's get going. Hi, Bruce.
Bruce.
Hello.
Hi. The bearer of the sacred information. How are you?
I am great. Thank you.
So I just want to jump right in, not waste any time, and start with the title of this episode. So can you tell us, why is your gas stove killing you?
Well, I have to pick up, Maryam, on your great point, which is natural gas a fossil fuel? So I live in Oakland, California now, but I actually grew up in Northwest England. And for my entire childhood, I shoveled coal from the back shed to warm our house. And it was right when natural gas was being drilled for in the North Sea. And we longed to get rid of that coal and get natural gas, because that was modern and cool and cleaner than coal. And that was sort of my image of natural gas, basically for the last several decades. And spent, as you suggested, a lot of time working on retiring coal plants, because we know that they're really bad for our health. They're really bad for the climate. And we've had enormous success, both in the US and amazing organizations similarly across in Europe, phasing out coal and replacing it with cleaner energy. And then after doing this work for almost 20 years, someone said to me, the biggest piece of your carbon footprint are the 4 gas appliances in your home. I said, what are you talking about? They're like, your water heater, your furnace, your dryer, and your stove.
Not the dryer.
No way. Are you telling the truth?
For gas appliances, it was a bigger carbon footprint than my car when I used to have a oil-fired car, gasoline car, petrol car. And I had never heard the story. And I was like, it can't be true. It just can't be true. So I did my research and I was like, oh yeah. As we've been making progress on all these other sectors, there's this thing literally under our feet or in our basement or in the closet that is emitting enormous amounts of pollution. So that was the first big revelation. But the second that really knocked my socks off was when someone said, 3 of those devices are required to be vented outside. All the pollution from heating water, drying your clothes, and heating your space, the pollution when they burn that gas has to be vented through a chimney outside. One doesn't. And then I was like, the stove? And they're like, yes, you're burning a fossil fuel inside a building, inside your home, inside your kitchen, one of the most sacred of all places. And no one told us that when we're cooking, whether it's boiling water for pasta or a holiday dinner, that we're emitting large amounts of pollution inside our homes. And we're still, the levels of pollution that we've known about for almost 3 decades are above levels that would be illegal outdoors in our homes. So that has been a big revelation. And that's when I first met Maryam, sort of sharing the story of we're burning a fossil fuel. It is indeed a fossil fuel. And we're burning it inside our home. And because of very effective lobbying by both home builders and the gas lobby, we've sort of missed this big thing that's in plain view. That if you think through it, right, it's a fossil fuel, it's dirty. When you burn it, it produces a lot of pollution. We're doing it in our kitchen, and we've never had the regulators or the gas industry be honest about, in fact, we're posing a serious health risk to people indoors whenever we have the temerity to turn on our kettle or cook our dinner.
That's wild. I don't even open the window when I use the cooker. That's so bad. What the heck? I didn't know that at all. Wait, so... All right, sorry to just hijack this, but 2 questions from the beginning. Firstly, from the last couple of episodes we've done, people have spoken about this idea of cleaner fuels. And is that just a myth? Is everything just bad? Is there no, apart from electricity, is there nothing that's good?
It's a mirage, and they've been very effective, right? So for a long time, the ad agencies in the United States working with the coal industry put out clean coal. You can make coal clean. And it was nothing but an advertising effort to try to rebrand something that is filthy as clean.
Like milk.
Now, so when you burn a unit of gas and a unit of coal, yes, in many regards, the gas is cleaner.
Okay.
But that's sort of like light cigarettes. It's still smoking. And so if we're actually trying to have a healthy and sustainable planet, we can't be burning coal or gas. And particularly from a health perspective, I mean, nobody would burn coal in their kitchen without a chimney. And here we are burning gas in our homes without chimneys. And it's a pollutant that may be very familiar to your audience because it's an issue that is front and center, particularly in London with all the diesel cars. So Europe, as a part of trying to solve this climate change problem, as you know, went hard on investing in diesel engines. Well, one of the big downsides, one of the several big downsides of diesel is it emits a lot of nitrogen dioxide. That is the same pollutant that comes from your gas stove.
Oh man, this is distressing. This one is a little bit more distressing than the other ones that we've done so far. Okay, all right. So the cleaner fuels thing is really just an excellent marketing campaign, and actually cleaner doesn't mean clean. And Bruce, what am I supposed to do about this? Because my parents have a gas stove and they're not going to get rid of it. I can't go downstairs now and say to them, oh, you need to just chuck it away and get a new one. How do you start this conversation with normies? With people who are not necessarily engaged in the climate conversation, apart from telling us what you've just told us and petrifying us. How do we, or maybe that is the right way to start. I'm so confused. I'm having an existential crisis on a podcast. This is really bad. How do we start?
You flagged one of the very simple things we can do, which is when you're cooking, open the window, right?
Okay.
There are things we can do to minimize the pollution, for sure. The awesome thing is that the technology to replace gas is better. So this is not a situation where we're saying, go back to the Stone Age and do something that, live in caves. This is actually the technology, the induction stove, the modern electric stove, not the old-fashioned ones that with the rings. Those were those are not the most efficient, and for many reasons they're not held up as sort of what a gourmet chef would ever use. But induction, which is the modern electric, you can now get hobs at a low cost. The price has come down a lot in the last decade. And a lot of high-end chefs, or famous chefs, and probably the most famous of all, certainly on this side of the Atlantic, is the Great British Bake Off, where it's all induction.
Oh, is it? Okay.
You can use that, Ben. You can use that as a
that's
selling
a good starting place with my mum. She might be convinced by that one. Okay, I see.
So it works better. It's faster. It's more precise than gas, and it doesn't have any of the heat. It doesn't have any of the pollution. So rather than replacing your stove on day one, because there are costs and inconveniences of doing that, getting a hob and start cooking and using and seeing if indeed that, as most people think, it is a better product, then in time, as the gas range comes to an end of its useful life, replace it with an awesome new electric one.
Because I feel like I in some ways remember maybe a conversation at some point in my house where there was someone was convinced that you can't really cook with an electric stove, that you have to have a gas stove to be able to cook well.
Like cooking with fire. That's
yeah,
what
do you know what I mean? Like
me.
that's the true, the sounds, the noise, the ambiance. But is that just a lie then? Because you've said that like electric or induction stoves are more efficient and more accurate.
They're faster. They're literally you put
in every way.
You put a kettle on, and literally it's half the time of a gas stove. So my brother has a gas stove, and I got my induction, and we literally did sort of a live video. Okay, it's a gallon of water on our stoves, and we got a stopwatch and timed it, and the induction was literally twice as fast. So it gives us, it's a better cooking experience, and again, it just doesn't have all these pollution problems associated with gas. So, but what the importance here is, so you mentioned, we've been told that gas is a better product. And if you go back 20 years, when we had old-fashioned electric, there's no question it was better, because that old-fashioned electric was slow, and once it got hot, it would burn everything, right? It has not been a good experience. Gas industry has taken enormous advantage of that sort of historical, it used to be like that with electric. And once I say it, you will see the little blue flame from the gas industry everywhere. Their marketing is ubiquitous. The little blue flame, that's what they sell you on. So that's been their marketing since I was a young kid, because it's this image of it's clean, burning blue flame, and it's safe. Well, it turns out it's actually not safe. And so it's the only thing people care about in their homes. So you don't really care how your clothes are dried or your water is heated, right? You just want the service. You want warm water and you want dry clothes.
Yeah.
So all of their marketing is focused on the gas stove, because that's the one sort of consumer-facing product that people have been led to believe is important. And so part of this is a broader conversation around we have to get gas out of our buildings in total, both for a climate reason. We're not going to meet any of our climate goals if we keep burning large amounts of gas in our buildings. And there's this immediate health issue. And it's also a profound equity issue, because certainly in the United States, size of house and age of house tracks race and income. The smaller the house, the older the house, the higher concentration of pollution.
Right.
No surprise, right? The smaller the unit, you've got concentration. And then newer homes, in many cases, do have some sort of ventilation built into the overall system. Old homes don't. So from a race and equity perspective, this has profound implications. And in a country like the United States, where we have this profound asthma epidemic, particularly young children, and in my home state of California, it's a huge cost on both, obviously, the kids and the family, but also on our state treating lots of children with asthma. It turns out that we're not actually tracking kids in homes with gas stoves. And we know that this pollutant, NO2, which is, again, the diesel issue you're facing outdoors in places like London, triggers asthma attacks and may even cause asthma. And so there's this whole health and equity issue associated with getting gas out that is starting to get attention, certainly in California and a couple of other states where they're really trying to tie how do we solve getting off of fossil fuels and also address some of these underlying equity issues.
Okay. All right. I feel okay. So we're oh, Bruce, you're so smart. What the heck? All right. We're jumping forwards. I want to come back because what I want to understand first is why and like, how did you come to care about this? You said that as a kid you were shoveling coal in your back garden to heat your house. So how did you go from being the kid who was literally shoveling the coal to now being the person that's trying to get rid of fossil fuels across the world? Like, that seems like a massive journey.
Yeah. So I grew up in a rural part of England, and it was a pretty bucolic place. I remember sort of the first big environmental issue that caught my attention was reading in the Guardian newspaper whales being killed by the Japanese. And that was like, how would anyone ever do that? That was sort of my sort of epiphany to this outside world where there's some grave injustices going on. And then I will date myself. Margaret Thatcher got elected.
Oh, wow.
And then nuclear weapons became this whole issue, right? And I lived just downstream from a nuclear reprocessing plant that ended up leaking a bunch of really nasty stuff into the Irish Sea, and outbreak of all these crazy, unusual cancers related to, and just sort of the growing awareness that, boy, there's governments unchecked, corporations unchecked, profound impacts on people and communities. And then moved to the States when I was 17 and began to read a lot about sort of environmental issues. And the most scary was my first class on climate change, where this old professor who was a long-standing climate scientist, all the windows were closed, and he had this PowerPoint up on the screen showing carbon dioxide levels climbing in the atmosphere for the last 100 years. No. And I was like, what's going on here? He's like saying 5-alarm fire, but he's sort of got his monotone. It's like, yeah, burning of fossil fuels. We're heading to an unstable climate, uninhabitable climate. And the building was next door to the university heating plant, which was a coal-fired power plant. And I literally would walk out of the classroom, across the street. There was coal on the sidewalk from spilling over the fence from the heating plant. And I was like, this disconnect was just so surreal to me, that here's a world-class research institution saying 5-alarm fire, doing something on climate. And the very thing powering the building where this professor is sharing this critical information, there was a disconnect. And so that really inspired me to think about, okay, how do we connect the science with the urgency of solving this climate crisis? And so went and got a law degree, and I've had the very good fortune of working for a bunch of amazing organizations, much of it working with community groups who have been sort of on the front lines of living next to coal plants, living next to coal mining operations where they're getting hammered and enjoying none of the benefits, and really sort of working with the parts of the country that have sort of been sacrifice zones. As the rest of our economy has been growing, we've been sacrificing parts of West Virginia, parts of Wyoming, urban areas with these giant coal plants, and really beginning to unwind a bunch of this fossil fuel infrastructure. And so we made enormous progress on coal, but we also have these other fossil fuels, oil and natural gas. And so began a couple of years ago thinking about buildings. And this was the revelation I shared with you, which is it never occurred to me. We have 70 million buildings in the US burning enormous amounts of natural gas, and we have not had this conversation. And it turns out there are big health issues right in our kitchen.
In terms of fossil fuels, is it a big three? Is it like you said, natural gas, oil and coal? And those are the three big things. Are there any others?
Those are the three big ones.
Okay,
those are the three. Those are the three. I mean, there are other things that cause climate change, right? Certain types of fertilizer, but the big things that are driving the hurricanes hitting Louisiana as we speak, driving fires here in California with record fire season, it's primarily oil, gas, and coal.
Okay.
So, Ben, I hope that you're seeing why this, we needed to have this conversation.
I don't know why you even brought me here. This is just deeply traumatizing. I'm so scared.
But also amazing. I mean, what's interesting for me about this is that you start to look at everything differently, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things, Bruce, that I think, I've heard you talk about and was really interesting for me is so you worked on coal for a while, like getting rid of coal and shutting coal down, and that was easy, right? You've said before, where the coal plants are, you shut them down. I want to talk through why gas in our buildings is such a bigger task than that, because I didn't fully understand it, because it's not just getting rid of your gas stove, right? It's bigger than that.
It is, but in some regards, we're kind of a little slow to solving the climate crisis, right? We're kind of running out of time. This is the decade. It's either make or break. Right. We know how to solve electricity, that is, replace coal and gas plants with wind and solar, and what the UK is doing in offshore wind is a model for the rest of the world. It's amazing. Really taking a technology that was nascent, expensive, and now is cheaper than fossil fuels. It's amazing. On vehicles, we know that we just need to stop burning petrol and diesel and replace it largely with electric and increase investments in public transit. Mm-hmm. There's this other sector, the buildings, where we haven't had the conversation around how to do this. And in some regards, it is easy because many homes already have it. So it's not sort of new technology. We're not waiting for a scientist to find something or take something from a laboratory and bring it to market. You can literally go down to the local appliance store and buy these alternatives. But we have this inertia in the system and a very powerful lobby industry that has been telling us, go to gas, go to gas, go to gas. And so on the individual building level, it's fairly easy. Now, there's also all the infrastructure. Think about the millions of miles of pipes under our cities. How do we unwind all of that and replace that with an all-electric future? So in some regards, it's easy. And in some regards, it's sort of unwinding literally since the UK found the North Sea oil and North Sea gas, and similarly in the US with the fracking boom, everyone's been pushing gas, right? There's a huge boom in the system, pushing the system to go to gas. We need to unwind all that. And so that is the most complicated piece, I would argue, is the politics, because we're dealing with large multinational gas interests.
Mm. And when you say the politics, do you mean the money, or do you mean
both?
Yeah, okay.
Both. Just to sort of, yes, a lot of people have been employed in the gas sector, and that is an important piece of getting this transition right. I would submit, going on a limb, the way that Margaret Thatcher treated the coal miners was not a model for a just transition by any measure, right? It was, you're on the streets and out of a job.
That's like Billy Elliot, right?
It didn't have to be that way.
I always have to just have visual references for what I'm imagining. So Billy Elliot is my vision of coal miners being screwed over. Okay, yeah, cool.
So there's all these people employed. How do we help ensure that there is a transition over the next 10, 15 years that's fair, right? They've worked hard. They have family to support. So that piece, how to do that, is going to be critical, and that requires careful planning and government help. And so that getting this conversation started about how to unwind the gas infrastructure in each of our countries is going to take much of the next decade, but the climate science is telling us we got to get it done.
Wow.
And I think, Bruce, something you said earlier, and just to come back to it again, is because this is something that I have become really interested in, is that all the, often, and I think you are very good at not doing this, but often the conversations around climate change and things just are so abstract. But actually this is about people, right? And I think you've talked very much about this being an equity issue. It's in our homes. Do you find that, I guess, I don't even know what my question is. It's just, for me, this is one that is so clearly about people. It's not just about carbon.
I mean, that was the big revelation. When I first started working on coal, I lived in the upper Midwest in a little town called Madison, a little college town. We had 3 coal plants in town. And they were causing a fair amount of pollution. And that was pretty horrendous. But what really took it from being, and we started working locally, what took it into a national campaign was this recognition that, the mining, burning, and disposal of coal ash waste is this long supply chain with people getting hammered at every step of the process. And so what really took this from a local issue to a national campaign to phase out coal was the recognition and the sort of solidarity that we're not going to solve any of these problems individually until we stop mining and burning coal. And so really building common purpose with folks. The Appalachian region is where we used to get most of our coal, right? It's the oldest mountain range in the United States. About 25 years ago, to get the last shards of coal out, they started blowing the tops off of mountains. It is one of the most horrendous, unbelievable things. Think about your favorite mountains. And literally they were going in with more dynamite than they used in the Vietnam War and blowing the tops off to get the last shards of coal out. Taking these giant piles of rock, filling in the lakes, rivers, and streams, and basically turning it into a moonscape. This would never happen in any of the wealthy states. This would never happen in states that had diversified economies. It was happening in the poorest parts of America. And it was just, nobody was listening. But that coal was obviously being burned in New York and California and around the country. And so finding common ground between the folks who were getting hammered on the mining, and then there was other steps along the process. The coal trains, in the United States at least, are not covered. So when they go through a town, they literally are pouring dust all over the people who live next to the tracks, which again are typically people on the lower income scale. And then the burning, the coal plants are typically on the outskirts of town, or they're always in the lower income community, right? There's no coal plants in Manhattan or in Marin County in California. And so there was this moment of like, we have all these injustices along, how do we find common ground? And it's the same with all the fossil fuels, which is how do we build the sort of political alliance among everyone being impacted around a common purpose so that we can stand up and overthrow the fossil fuel empire.
This is, wow. This is like really, I don't know why I didn't like register this in my mind, but I think like the images that I have when I think of coal are like Mary Poppins and Oliver Twist and like little chimney sweeps, and it's really cute, and it's like, soot's dirty and you can like just wash it off and it doesn't do anything, and it's just like, but this is like really bad if like trains are driving through cities or going through cities and or towns and just dumping waste on people. Also, so what is the impact of coal, or what was the impact of coal on the people that were affected by it?
So the biggest impacts undoubtedly were the burning. And there's 2 big things. One is the sort of smog pollution that you think of when you think of air pollution in a city, including a place like London. It's the haze, right? And that when you breathe it in, typically does a couple things. One is some of them are like, it's a weak acid. So it's literally like sunburn on your lungs. So if you have asthma or any other respiratory ailment, you're just getting hammered. And in a time of COVID, that's particularly terrifying. The other are the very, very fine particles that get into your lungs, past your lungs' natural defenses, and get into your bloodstream, where they cause heart attacks. So there's been a ton of amazing research over decades, which is why in most developing countries, we have strong air pollution laws, because we know this stuff kills you and causes huge health impacts. So that has been where most of the attention is focused on. What do we do about the burning and the impact on lungs? The other, and there's a very insidious one, which is mercury. I don't know if you remember when I was in grammar school, I remember the sort of mercury coming out during our science class. It would roll around on the floor. Well, mercury is a very toxic pollutant. The term Mad Hatter comes from folks who made hats with mercury, and then you put the mercury in the rim, and they would literally get poisoned using all this mercury. That's the term Mad Hatter, is poisoning themselves with mercury. When you burn coal, it releases a lot of mercury. It falls into our lakes, rivers, and streams, and then actually accumulates up the food stream, up the food chain. So fish are the primary way that we get
that salmon.
Exactly. So that's how it gets into your body. So that, and think the insidious thing about mercury is it causes brain damage in young children. It affects their ability for the brains to develop. So those are the two big ones. It's searing your lungs, and then particularly for young kids who are ingesting mercury-contaminated fish. So that's been the big motivator to phase out the public health concerns about why we've been so successful on coal.
I know, just to kind of give context, like you were saying how you've worked, for the last 20 years to shut down a large number of these plants in the US. From what I understand, we're shutting them down in Europe, but in the rest of the world, because, sometimes I think, oh, well, this is not an issue anymore because, we know we're shutting it down, but in the rest of the world, that's not the case, right? Like plants are still being built. This is still happening.
That's right. The UK is the best story out there. I mean, there was a day this past summer where literally for several months, there was not an ounce of coal being burned in UK power plants, which for the country that started the Industrial Revolution, it's monumental. Now, the developing world, Europe, US, is largely turned the corner. It's all clean on energy, and the big fight is how fast. In developing countries, oftentimes pushed by large corporate interests, they are still building coal plants. So in China, in India, that awareness of the problem on the climate is starting to change. And so it is definitely slowed down. But then one of the big deciders of whether or not we're successful in averting the worst catastrophic impacts of climate will be, can we collectively, through the Paris Agreement and other efforts, really work together to stem the build out of fossil fuels, including coal and gas, and accelerate the transition that we're starting in many countries, developed countries, such that we're doing this globally, right? Because we're one little planet and we got to do this together. Yeah. And you're exactly right. There's still coal being built, and the challenge ahead of us is making sure that slows and then ultimately reversed.
And then in terms of gas, are the impacts similar, the same, or different?
So the big issue with gas is the nitrogen dioxide. And that, again, it's been studied for about 50 years, the health impacts of NO2. We know it triggers asthma attacks. It sears the lungs, or it really irritates the lungs. The more recent research is, and the way that the Environmental Protection Agency here described it, is there is, quote, strong evidence it may cause asthma, which to me was kind of shocking because I thought we didn't know why is it that otherwise healthy children and adults end up getting asthma, because around much of the world we have this asthma epidemic, right? We didn't have this 20, 30 years ago. Yes, there was some asthma, but now it's much more common. And there's increasingly concern that it's connected to the NO2, the nitrogen dioxide emissions. And a lot of that comes from the burning of gas.
Mm-hmm. And that's shocking, because that's something that anyone listening could themselves, or, people they know their family have developed asthma out of nowhere later in life, right? And it's this, we've heard of people who are like, well, I didn't have asthma as a kid. Like, why is this happening now? And like so many things, I think people probably think it's their own fault somehow. And actually, it's very insidious to think that there is a whole industry out there that's pushing something that is so poisonous.
Yeah, and benefiting from it. That's terrible. It's disgusting, really.
So we were looking at, okay, so what's the societal cost of asthma? And so in California, we spend about $12 billion a year on treating asthma. Like much of the world right now, we're in kind of economic crises. And I think about the children who end up in the emergency room with an asthma attack, get good treatment, stabilized, and then sent back, and no one ever asks, what are the asthma triggers in the home? And if they live in a small or older unit, are they going back right into a home where everyone's cooking at home today, right? Because no one's going out to a restaurant. And we're not connecting the dots here. And in some regards, it's a super easy thing to fix. And it's certainly much, much cheaper to replace a gas stove than it is to treat a kid with asthma in an emergency room. So there's enormous opportunities here. And the trick is, how do we build the political will to do something about this problem right in plain?
That's the thing, right? Like, this isn't about inventing some kind of newfangled super tech that's going to save us and save the planet. we know what we need to do. Like, we know the problem, we know the solution, we even know how to go from the problem to the solution. Now we just have to have the will to do it and actually demand that it's done. And that for me is mind-boggling, because I also didn't realize until a few months ago that so many of the things that we need to do, we already know how to do them. We just aren't doing them.
Well, let me give you sort of so as I was going down this journey and learning this stuff, I was like, this is completely crazy. So what do we do about it, right? How do we solve this problem? And I live in the city of Oakland, and next door, the city of Berkeley, who's always been on the sort of cutting edge of progressive policies. And they, like many cities around the world, have a political leadership and a constituency that's saying, there's a climate emergency. Wake up, people. We got to do something about this climate emergency. So they passed the Climate Emergency Declaration, which was this city passed a vote saying, we declare it's emergency and we will do everything we can to solve this crisis. So that was a good step. And then the question is, well, what can we as a city do? Well, it turns out in most cities, there's two big sources of pollution: traffic and buildings. And so they began to say, well, what can we do about buildings? Oh, we approve permits for new construction. Every day someone comes in to build a new unit or a new apartment building. And we never say, stop putting gas into new buildings for another 50 years when the planet's on fire. So we worked with the city of Berkeley to put together a city ordinance that says, no, can't build gas anymore. Any new construction in the city of Berkeley, starting January 1 of 2020, has to be all electric. And we initially thought, well, it's great. It's a very small town, right? It's iconic, but is anyone going to care? It got national and international attention. That it was, in part, what you're describing, Maryam, is people hadn't put these things together. You're trying to solve the climate crisis and a public health crisis. Well, the way to solve it is to stop building the very things that are causing the problem. And we hadn't quite connected the dots. It took off like wildfire. Maybe not the best metaphor here. But now we have 30 cities that have adopted what Berkeley did, literally in a space of 9 months, including San Jose, which is the 10th biggest city in the United States. And this debate is now percolating across the US. So from a sort of feeling helpless, like, oh my goodness, I've got all this new information, what the heck do we do about it? We took it to folks, we built the political coalition, and it passed unanimously. Now, the industry has sued. Everything gets sued over here in the United States, but we'll ultimately win. But it's changed the conversation because it's connected what people can do locally to solving a big health and climate change problem at the local level. And that has been super amazing because it's putting power back into the hands of people rather than feeling helpless.
What you're talking about with Berkeley is so important for this podcast as well, because part of the premise of what we're trying to share here with everyone is this idea that cities can lead the way in this. Like, cities can become examples of how you can help fight this climate crisis. And, Berkeley's done that. And am I right, Bruce, in thinking that in the UK we have some legislation coming in around this as well, or not?
There are efforts underway in the UK to phase out the sale of new gas boilers. So that I believe it starts in a couple of years, if you wanted to put in a new boiler when your old one breaks, you're going to have to put in an electric. So that's an important first step because the biggest gas use in your building is typically the boiler to heat your home and or your water. But it's not actually going to solve the problem because we still have all the pipes and we still have all the other gas uses in buildings. So it's an important first step, should be applauded for sure. The challenge, the work ahead is how do you make this more comprehensive and begin to think about what does it take to get all the gas out of the greater London area? What does it take to get all the gas out of Cumbria? Right? So we're beginning to think at the scale commensurate with the scale of the problem, which is we've got 10 years to stop burning all these damn fossil fuels if we're going to have a planet we recognize. Okay.
So let's say we figure out what it takes. We already know what it takes, but let's say we action it. Hypothetically, what does that look like for the world that we're living in now, 10 years from now? Like you've said a couple of times that there's a 10-year time limit. There's a tipping point where the effects of whatever's happening have gone too far. What happens if we manage to change that curve? What does that look like for us?
I think in less than 10 years, we're going to look back and say, you used to have a gas stove in your kitchen?
Hopefully.
That's like coal. Like, come on, that's like so 1960s. And so, I mean, I do think the notion of burning a fossil fuel in and next to people will become so, that's bonkers. People breathe and they need oxygen, they need clean air. And the notion that we're literally burning something we know is full of many, many contaminants will become so, wasn't that quaint? And in 10 years from now, you'll walk into any house and there won't be such old-fashioned gas appliances anywhere to be seen. And then all the knock-on benefits associated with that, right? We've dramatically reduced the rate of asthma. We've dramatically put us on a trajectory to solve the climate crisis. And certainly for those of us in the developed world, we've continued to demonstrate, and certainly we have a lot of resources at stake at our disposal compared to the rest of the world. We're showing how it can be done. And to the extent there are lessons that can help other developing countries leapfrog over fossil fuels, will have helped provide a path and the resources to make that possible.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. So final question in this section is, if people like Ben have heard this for the first time, and are having their minds blown and are now committed to doing something, to taking some kind of action, what is the top thing? Like, what is the one thing that you could say for someone to do?
Run for political office.
What's the number two thing that's
help your best friend run for political office?
Okay.
Right. I mean, just look at the state of the world. I mean, the folks who are representing us in the US, and one should never speak ill of other countries' leaders, but these are not the shining moments for national leaders in most countries in the world. That's in part a reflection, I would argue, that that we've sort of disconnected the political world with recognition that it has profound impacts on the world we're trying to create. And so how do we get more engaged? How do we inspire folks that public service is an awesome calling, and there's the future of our planet and everything we care about is on the line, as long as we have folks who currently are sitting in those most precious seats who are just heading in the wrong direction as fast as humanly possible. So, but getting the politics right. And one of the things I have thought a lot about, when I grew up in England, in Northwest England, I never had a class on politics. I actually didn't know how politics works in the United States. I didn't know there was a unicameral government. I didn't understand that the US had an executive branch, a legislative branch, a judicial branch. I didn't understand any of this. And I thought I was fairly educated. So there's something about understanding how our society is organized, and then how we as individuals can help aspire and push and shoot for a better world.
Amazing. So that's small feat, everyone. You gotta get engaged and run for office. I love it. Imagine if everyone just thought running for office was just something that you did at some point in your life. The world looks so different. Okay, let's move on to our closing segment.
And now it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with climate confessions, this is a quick fire round where we all get to share something, confess something that we're maybe not so good at when it comes to sustainability or climate change, that we know we should be better at, but we just don't get it right. Well, Ben, I've done the intro, so you gotta share yours.
Okay, my climate confession for today is that when I sleep, I grind my teeth really, really badly, and I really like to chew like grind on like hard boiled sweets and like that kind of thing. But when I go to the cinema, particularly the cinema, sometimes I do it if I go to McDonald's as well, but I have like a really bad habit of chewing straws because they don't really break. Right, so I gnaw at them and try and like rip them apart, kind of like what a dog does. Do you know what I mean? Like just like tries to tear something apart, and I will take like 6 or 7 straws. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I do. And I just chew them apart and then throw them away. And I never even realized that was a bad thing. Like, obviously I knew that you weren't supposed to waste plastic, but I assumed it was being recycled, and that's a whole other conversation. But that is the thing that I do that I can't even promise that I'm gonna stop, but that is my climate confession for today. Bruce, do you have one that you want to share? What is your climate confession?
You foreshadowed that I would have to answer this question, so I've been spending the last 48 hours like, what is my climate confession? When I look at... So I've tried to reduce my meat consumption and rarely haven't eaten meat for a long time because that's clearly has a climate impact. I love cheese. Hard cheese has a pretty high carbon impact. And so growing up in Northwest England, where I loved eating cheese, then I moved to Wisconsin, which is the dairy capital of the United States. I eat cheese 2 or 3 meals. Really should eat a lot less cheese. So that's the one I'm like, at some point I'm going to have to reduce my cheese.
It's hard to let go. Easy to get rid of coal, hard to get rid of cheese. Understandable.
That's a great slogan.
One is much more delicious than the other.
That's right.
Okay, I'll share mine very quickly. Mine is really an indication of, I find like, I'm just going to tell you, I think that if people are going to watch all of these episodes and they hear yours and mine, Ben, because we do one every episode, they're going to get to know us really well. I feel like you're going to get to know me really well. So mine is going to be that mine is also an indication of the laziness that I have, which is that sometimes I'll, be really good. I'll take food, I'll pack it into like a little container, I'll put it in the fridge, and then I'll something will happen, I'll forget about it, and then I'll pull it out and it'll be moldy. And I just cannot bring myself to wash it out. So I will just throw the whole plastic container away after I've used all the energy to wash that initial container in the first place, refrigerate it for a while, and so I know. That's mine.
It definitely helps me to hear all of that bad news and then hear that you eat too much cheese. So thank you for sharing that, Bruce. And I think we've had a great conversation in terms of the steps that we can take moving forwards. Get rid of your gas stoves if possible. Run for office if possible. Do a Kanye. Live your dream. Who knows what could happen. And Bruce, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information, and in a way that was really easy to understand, and answering the really simplistic questions, because it's really changed a lot for me in terms of the way that I see it, and I imagine the same for Maryam.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you. It was a real treat to have this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
We've got to figure out those outros, man.
I know.
Thanks for joining us this week. If you enjoyed what you listened to today, please rate and subscribe and share the episode with a curious friend. Join the conversation on socials using the hashtag ClimateCuriousPod and let us know what you want to hear about next time. You can find us online at TEDxLondon.
This podcast was made possible by TEDxLondon's headline partner, City. City is all about progress and supporting great ideas. And for the past 5 years, they've supported us to bring world-changing ideas to the TEDxLondon stage. Now they're taking it to the next level by supporting this new podcast. Thanks, City. This episode was produced by Josie Coulter, curation and research by Tara Cooper, engineered and mixed by Ben Beheshti, artwork designed by Sabrina Russo and Rebecca Mingus, music composed by Ben the Falcon Beheshti, presented by Maryam Pasha and Ben Hurst.
Thank you.